Yo, it's Captain, and I want to do a lighter video today, and I want to talk about, well, we'll see if it's lighter, but I want to talk about like story versus gameplay in a video game. I was gonna do we played some Wuthering Waves again today on Stream, and I had expected to do a third impressions, right? See what we got, but we didn't really get anything new today because I got stuck in the story. I had a shorter time to play to begin with, but I got stuck in the story, and I was particularly antsy today. So the story actually really drove me nuts. I mentioned it on the last video that was a thing. I was just kind of itching to get back to the gameplay for that game when we were in the story segments, and today it was really bad, and it was kind of like like a kind of draggy part of the story where there was just a lot of explanations of things and just kind of things just coming up. And I guess it's for, they're trying to set up, some stuff for later. But man, it was really not like, it was a very story where that you were not participating. You did not feel like you were in it or anything. You were just listening. It was like you were listening to a lecture, like a school lecture or a business lecture or something. Just somebody's like, here's some information, we're going to tell you about this today. And oh boy, it was tough. It was tough. I was really antsy, and I was wanting to get to that gameplay. And oh man, now, in the game's defense, you can totally just skip the story. There's a button right that says press to skip. You can skip it anytime. But I don't want to skip the story. I don't want to skip the story. I don't think I've ever skipped a story. Um, I want to experience a game with all it has to offer. What is the dev's vision here? What are they presenting to me? That's the game I want to play. I don't want to like piecemeal it out. I don't want to skip the parts I don't like. I mean, it's not like there's anything wrong with that. There's certainly value in that. I wanted to, and even towards the end I was like, okay, I wasn't listening to the voice acting, or I wasn't letting the voice acting play. I was so antsy and itchy, and it was just so dragging on. I was like, as soon as I had read the subtitles, I was going. I was kind of, I was on stream, so I was kind of waiting for like the end of a sentence for the voice acting, so it wasn't so, harsh on the ears. But right, like I was itching to go. But that's as much as I'll really do. Like I still read it. I didn't skip the story. I'll skip like speaking of reading, I'll skip like readable things or something with the intention of going back to read them later, which very rarely happens because I'm skipping them because I don't have time or energy to read them. So when am I ever gonna get that? So it was like a really strong example of the heavy story element and how it can get in the way of the gameplay element. And why it's strong for me, particularly on this game, and why we're talking about this, is this game has really good actiony bits. Like so it has a lot of story because it's technically a JRPG in genre, right? And well, I guess I don't know. I guess you could say any RPG is gonna have a lot of story. But so there's just like a lot of story. But this one has really good action gameplay. And it's quite nice. Like there's combos to hit, you know? There's like tactics and different strategies and all these little, well, I guess every game has that. But there's like all sorts of things you can do in the moment with your button presses. You know what I mean? Like the closer you get to a fighting game with huge tool sets that you can pick from, and specific uses for each one, and disadvantages and advantages, times when you should be pulling them out. That's like pure action game. Fighting game is probably the purest action game you're gonna get. Or like a PvE fighter, spectacle fighter, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff to play with in this game, and I'm interested in it, and I love that kind of stuff. I love like digging in and pressing my buttons and learning the buttons and having mastery over a active gameplay system. And so very strong action, and then literal presentation. Literal like history lecture in the same game, and I'm like, what are we doing? What are we doing? So it just got me thinking. Like this comes up I don't know. Does this come up in like every game? I think this is a challenge in general for game development, for a video game itself. How to marry these two things. Because you don't have to. You probably should, but it's really hard. So right, like you're gonna get a lot of games that just don't do it. You're gonna get a lot of games that don't do it. And like I said, you don't really have to. There's a lot of great, particularly RPGs, that people play because the story's good. And a good story is going to make your game more compelling. You don't need it, right? You don't need it to be compelling, but a good story, people like stories. So it's gonna be a factor. And if you've got an RPG with a big story to tell, a lot of people are playing the games for that kind of thing. Think like Final Fantasy or something. You know, there's a lot of like story and dialogue and cutscenes, big ass cutscenes, and then there's gameplay. You know, think about like a boss. You might have a wild introduction to a boss with a really cool cutscene, and maybe it's a minute long. Well, you're not playing; you're just seeing a cool introduction to a boss, and then it drops you in, and now you're playing, but you're kind of hyped to play, so it feels good. Like you didn't technically your gameplay was interrupted by a story sequence, but if it's done right, you're gonna be hyped, and when you get by the time it's like that. It's like they're holding you back and building you up, and then the cutscene ends. They let you go, and it's like, oh, it's boss fight time, right? So that can amp you up, right? So like, it's not like you can just get rid of story, because story is optional in video games, completely optional. It is not required for the video game medium, right? It's required for a book, right? It's I don't know. Could you think of a book without it? But like movies, need stories, but they don't need words and dialogue like a book does. They can do it with just visuals. Well, a game doesn't need it doesn't need the story at all. It doesn't need the dialogue. It doesn't need a story. It could just be a gameplay. It could just be something where it is fun to press the buttons in this way. Now, as humans, you're going to associate a narrative to anything. So I feel like on some level, everything's going to have a story just because you're going to put it there. Like if the game of Pong, is there a story for Pong? No, but are you going to assign a narrative to it as a human? You have to. I don't think we live outside of narratives. So what's the narrative of Pong? Well, you are challenging the paddle on the other side to a game of table tennis, and you want to win, right? That's the narrative. I mean, Mario, the old school Marios, like technically have a story, but it's the lightest story you can get. It's go save the princess. It's go save the princess, and that expands as you talk. As you can end up talking to more toads, and the later games. And Odyssey's got this whole like wedding plot thing going on, and those are all like enhance the game. But really, it's still just the same thing. The basic narrative of like none of that matters in your moment to moment gameplay. None of that matters because the gameplay itself is going to create a story. Your performance of the gameplay is a story and all of itself. So you don't need an additional one like a written story on top of it. You don't need it. But again, is going to be helpful particularly for specific genres. So you see this in different genres, like genres that are more on the RPG side. are going to more often have stories and more often benefit from stories. And they're going to have longer story sections, right? Because it just kind of makes sense. And things more on the action side, they're going to have lighter stories, they're going to have more gameplay, right? And they're going to benefit from that, right? Are both sides going to benefit from each other? Well, yes, because you do have to have gameplay, even if your game's like fully on the story side. Even a walking section, even a walking simulator has gameplay because you're walking around and choosing where to walk and look. Um, and if you push it too far, there is an argument that you're not in a game anymore, but you're in an interactive. People want to call it a different medium, like an interactive movie or an interactive presentation or something, right? Because you've just pushed it so far that it's even like even beyond walking simulator, you know. And there's people who argue that even walking simulators are too far and they're not in the game medium anymore. So you can get too far, but like you have to have gameplay. Like if you find a way to get rid of gameplay, you're not in a game anymore. That's the point. That's the point of this little section here. So you have to have the gameplay. So no matter how wild your story game is, you got to have the gameplay. And even if you're on the other end, where you've got a super action game, you're gonna benefit from a little bit of story because right, humans attach to narratives. Everything's a narrative. It's like how you always people what is it, anthropomorphize things, personify things. Everything has to get the human treatment. Like you see patterns in things. You want to pretend like your pets and stuff have these complex emotions and thoughts and things when they probably don't. Oh, I'm gonna get some angry letters. But you know what I mean. You want to attach a story. You see like a worm crawling across the street, and you're like, "Oh, I'll help you out, buddy. This is you want to. This is your big adventure. You want to make sure you get across the street." And he's just like, the worm is not doing that. The worm is like, food, 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 food. You know what I mean. That's what it's doing. But you want to do that. You see like a rock on the edge of something, and you're like, "Oh no, the rock. He's gonna fall. He's gonna get hurt. I'll move the rock." Like it's just a rock. Right, but people just naturally do that. So because people are so story oriented, everything has to be a story for people. If you can put a story in the game and give people context for the action they're doing, it's going to amplify it. It's going to feel better. Like if I'm doing a cool action thing and defeating some pixels on the screen, that's really cool. But now all of a sudden you say, "Yo, these pixels are the invading force, and you're the last hero against the forces of evil to save your town that's full of grandpas and children that can't defend themselves. It's just you." Well, now I feel really compelled to beat up those pixels. You know what I mean? Like, oh my god, I gotta save the town. So right, like you need both things. They're gonna help each other. No matter which side you're on, gameplay, story, you're gonna be helped by branching in a little bit. But usually, we're gonna talk about genres. Usually, you get a different kind of gameplay. An action game is gonna have a light story to give you a lot of time to do the action because it's very much about the gameplay. It's very much about the buttons. That's where the expression, that's where the joy, that's where the fun part is. And so usually they don't want to get in your way too much because if you have a big story, you don't get to press buttons during the story. You're watching a cutscene. You stop and now you're watching a movie. You're not playing a game, right? So even if it's a cool cutscene, right? I signed up for an action game. I signed up to press buttons. You're not letting me press buttons. So the action scenes are going to be like, action games are usually going to just have really over the top cutscenes, not a lot of dialogue, or if it is, it's going to be really punchy dialogue to keep you excited. It's going to be like a John Wick movie, right? You go to the other end. I think it's been over here. Look, we'll get right and left right at some point in this video. I think the story's been over here. You go to the other end, you go to the RPGs, and you're expecting to have a lot more story. You're expecting to have a lot more time to sit in the dialogue, time to sit in the cutscenes, time to sit in the immersion and the world building and the character development and all that kind of stuff. And so what do you usually see for RPGs as far as gameplay? Well, it's not usually action. It's like it's like a turn based, or the gameplay is actually in the conversation where you are picking things to say and you're working, um, you're working through the narrative yourself. You know what I mean? And it's giving you time to do that. And why does that work well? Because like slower turn based, or like a grand strategy tactical kind of thing, these are already slower gameplays to begin with. It's like chess. It's not really going to get in your way if you got to take some time in between, because you're already probably sitting there thinking about your move for a while. you know it's not that odd for you to like, oh, okay, now I'll like think about the story. It's not like you're itching to press buttons like you are in an action game. So it just works a little bit better. The sides are gone. It just works a little bit. It makes more sense. Like, you're not gonna see an action game with really heavy story, and if you are, it's gonna have some trouble. It's gonna be at odds with itself. Now, there are action RPGs, where there's an RPG with a big story, but it's got action elements, like a Final Fantasy or like a Xenoblade or something. And all I can say is that these games have a delicate balance to strike, where the action is feeling like it's enhancing the story, and the story's feeling like it's enhancing the action by giving it a lot of context. Right. And I feel like you kind of got to sign up for that. Like, what you're signing up for when you play an action RPG, that's kind of happening. And usually the stories are gonna, they're gonna like reflect that. There is a difference between something like a CRPG and an action RPG, even like a J action RPG, where it's a JRPG, still got all that crazy stuff, but it's got more action. The combat is action oriented. But I think that is a little bit. See, this is where it gets tricky for me, because to me that makes more sense, and I've seen it a lot more than an action game with a heavy amount of story. You know what I mean? And maybe an action game with a heavy amount of story is the RPG with action combat. But at the same time, the a very prominent genre of RPGs with action is the top-down, Diablo-like isometric ARPGs, and they'll have story, but there's a lot. People like the original, the first Diablo. I heard an interview with the guys who were making it, and I think it was like 3 of them, and they were all in the interview. And one of them was like, "Yo, I was always pushing for just faster, get into the gameplay, faster, get more to it." And they said one of the reasons that they didn't have a character creator in Diablo was because it took too long to get to the action. If you're sitting there in a character, like, you just want to be like this one and go, right? This class, go, right? You want to start to play immediately because it's an action RPG. It's an action game. We don't want to sit around. And and like the story, I'm trying to think way back to Diablo 2, man. Cuz I remember that as some of the coolest cutscenes, and they were like rewards for beating the chapters, but there wasn't a lot of story moments. You'd talk to people in town and they would say something. They would have a conversation. There was story. They would give you context, and it was all just to build the horror and the atmosphere, which then gave a lot of cool context. But the great majority of gameplay was playing, And you compare that to like a Final Fantasy or something, and man, you're surprised when all of a sudden oh wait, it's right, I have to play. Like, it's, oh right, yeah, okay, yeah. Because you're just so engrossed in the story. Okay, so it gets a little hairy. Is this actually a lighter video? It's more of a conversational video. It's I just want to bring my thoughts on it, because here's the thing. So that's like the genres and how it works. How how story and gameplay are opposed to each other, and how the expression of that can, and the tipping of the balance of that can inform your genre, right? Like, which side do you want to lean on? You know, that's, you're probably going to be in these genres, versus if you tip it the other way, you're probably going to be in these genres, right? And if you try to make one, the more you try to like break that mold, you're going to have to really have some answers for it, particularly if it's like an action game. Like today, when I was playing Wuthering Waves, and it's this big JRPG, and I did not want to do the JRPG presentation part. I wanted to do that because it's really action oriented. It's really action oriented. It's not like Genshin, where the action's kind of light and fun, but it's not, it's not super deep, right? And so I'm not even into the gameplay for that, just personally. So it's not that big a deal when I'm watching a big story, because I'm into the story. Or when I'm playing Star Rail, these are like competitors to Wuthering Waves. They're in the same like gotcha genre. I'm playing Star Rail. That's a much more turn-based thing, and it's all about I love the story. I'm in. Just let me sit down and play the story. And then when a big fight comes up, it's turn-based, right? It's not like a big deal to me. It's another. I'm sitting there thinking about the story, and now I'm thinking about the battle, right? It's a very cerebral kind of gameplay, so it works. But speaking of other games that are like in the genre of Wuthering Waves, there's a thing with a heavy amount of story where you only have so much like capacity to play story games. You only have so much of yourself you can invest, like as a player. Like they're gonna take time. It's like you can only read so many books at once. It's usually one. I mean, you could read, a couple books. You could juggle a couple books at a time, and you're like, oh, I feel like my romance novel tonight, I'll read that. Oh, I feel like my adventure book tonight, I'll read that. You can do that, but it's gonna be, you're gonna reach a limit. I mean, like how many stories could you juggle in your head? In-depth stories that require reading through a book over a period of nights. Right, like if you're gonna finish the book in one night, if you're watching a movie, it's not a big deal. You just watch the movie, it's a couple hours, and you're done. Right? But a book is like an investment. Right? These big stories, these big like RPG stories, they're investments. You can't get them done at once. So it's gonna take time, like just real world time. Days, weeks, play sessions, several play sessions. Right. I guess you could compare it to TV shows, and people do watch several TV shows at once. But there's only so, you don't like binge watch one until it's done, and then you start the next TV show. I mean, I'm sure some people do, to be honest. But usually it's like, think about when you had to watch them. You weren't allowed to watch them. You had to just watch them when you weren't allowed to binge them. Excuse me. You just watch them when they were in the air. Every hour would be a different show, and then maybe the next night you get the same amount, or there'd be one a week. But like you can only do that for so much. Like there's only so many shows you can watch in one night, right? Even if you're gonna like watch the next episode the next night. And in that case, those particular episodes had a beginning and an end. So you had a satisfaction within that. So you could juggle a few, but each time you sat down to watch one, you had a beginning and an end. You had a satisfaction, a closure to help you move on to the next piece. But games and books aren't really like that. I mean, you can play towards the end of a scene, or you can read to the end of a chapter, and it will help with that. But it's not set up so directly. So it's pretty hard to juggle a bunch of big story games and keep those stories in your mind without mixing them up and without getting confused and losing information. And then you combine that with a more modern trend of like a live game, where it's not just the story goes from here to here and you always work on it and eventually you'll get done. It's the story goes from here to here for now, and next patch it'll now go all the way over here. So You've got like a time limit. You've got, there's going to be more. You've got like, it's an investment. You've only got so much you could do, right? So like with Wuthering Waves I'm playing, I told you playing Genshin, I played Star Rail, right? I kind of had to pick one Hoyo game because I could only commit to one of those because they're really big, deep stories, right? And it's like, well, I can keep one of those, and I, can want to do one of those. But even if I'm really into the story, I'm a very gameplay oriented player. So even if I'm really into the story, I can't play too many of those because if that's the only type of game I'm playing, I'm gonna get, pretty antsy because I want to press some buttons. So if you're a player that likes those types of things, you're going to be limited in your investment because there's just so much time in the day in your life. And if you're a player that is more leaning towards the action side, your amount of investment available is just going to be smaller because you're going to have less. You have the same, you've time limitations as well, but you want to devote less of that time to, a passive experience. You want more where you get to press some buttons. So when you're thinking about making this big story game, you're thinking about these big JRPGs or big just RPGs in general. You got to think like, well, people can only handle so many of these at one time. And I'm sitting here with Wuthering Waves, and I'm like, you guys have a really good action system, and it seems like you're trying to push story as much as your competitors when your competitors don't have a really cool action system, right? They have really cool story stuff. So it's like why are we competing over here in something that is directly opposed to the strength of our game, which is the cool action? Because like I said, the more actiony you get, you got to start to change the story, because when you're appealing to people who like to press buttons and be active and not passive, asking them to sit through a huge history presentation story, they're going to be at odds with that, right? And you're like, well, I can skip it. I'm like, this skip is a great feature and it should be there probably in every game, but like, it's not an excuse to make your story like too slow. Right? It's like, well, we know this story is too slow, but we let people skip it. We know it's too boring here, we let people skip it. What? No! Right? You got an action game. Make a fun action story. Make this thing punchy. Make it exciting. Give it lots of set pieces. And let the action speak for itself. Right? What are you competing with, a turn-based JRPG? Trying to get more story in than that thing? No, you're not gonna do it. You're not gonna do it. I'm sure you could. You could take it as a challenge, I suppose, to make the story so damn compelling that even an action gamer will sit through it. But you know what I mean? Like, I'm just sitting here thinking, like, man, this is so strange to me. This balance is an important thing, and here I am. I have signed up to this game because I love the action, and I'm getting not just too much story, but like a boring kind of story, a presentation kind of story. And you could argue maybe if the story, because that's another thing, maybe the story just needs to be really good. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe my whole argument is crazy. That was my beep. Maybe my whole argument is crazy, and that you can get as much story as you want in any game that you want as long as it's good enough. I mean, sure, as long as something's great, what? But I tell you, what makes a good action game story is that it doesn't get in the way too much. You know what I mean? Because it is going to be at odds. It's what the argument is. Well, the story's so good it overcomes the odds that it's in with the gameplay. Which, sure, if it does, it does. But like, it still doesn't change the fact that they are competing things, because you can't do two at once. And I guess I would I don't want to talk too long here. Like I said, it's just like a thought. It's just like a conversation piece. It's just something to wrap your head around, because I haven't fully I don't know if this isn't like an essay I wrote down with a point to drive home. It's just things I've been thinking about. I mean, something that was just a trigger to me today because it was driving me nuts. But I do want to give like a quick shout out to like when games actually marry the story and the gameplay together. And I will say that those games hit me the hardest. They are amazing and they stay with me. But they're usually shorter experiences. They're usually much tighter controlled experiences. And I don't see them very often because they're hard to do. Like you have to kind of build the game from the ground up to incorporate that. You know what I mean? And that it's much easier just to like, well, here's a story we want to tell, here's some gameplay we want to make, and we'll just pass back and forth between them. Tell some story, do some gameplay. Tell some story, do some gameplay. That's much easier than trying, like you see in like in Final Fantasy or something. I'm not saying they're bad or they're cheating or cutting corners. I'm just saying that style is much easier than trying to, from the ground up, build a story and a game that works together so that at all times the gameplay is expressed through the story and the story is expressed through the gameplay. Now, those games do not need any dialogue to do that. Right. It's just how they get there. Like think of I have a couple go-to examples because they're just off the top of my head. But I think of Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons, and that game, it doesn't have a lot of dialogue. It does have a story. You're a couple brothers and you control them both, right? And you're trying to like save your dad, I think is what it is. It's been a while since I played. But what I do remember is that what they did, like this is what I'm talking about, like right from you have to build the game from the ground up. What they did is you control both brothers at one time, and the brothers only need essentially half of a controller to control. Your controller has two thumbsticks and some buttons and some bumpers and stuff for each, right? And you got one hand on one thumbstick and some buttons, and you got the other hand on the other thumbstick and some buttons. Well, they just said, all right, right in half. This thumbstick is one brother, this thumbstick's the other, and you only need a couple buttons to do anything in the game. And so you've got those buttons. And so the whole time, it takes a little getting used to, but the whole time you're controlling two characters or things. And that story does things with that. There are times when you are separated and half your controller is just useless. And you better believe you feel that as a player. That hand's just sitting there doing nothing and you wish it could. And they do some amazing things with this story with that. Just intuitive things. They don't need a tooltip to tell you, oh, this has changed because the story is different now. You can tell. They don't need a tooltip like, oh, try this. No, you'll do it instinctively. You get to a point in the game where you will do it instinctively because you just wish it was there. And they play with that because they know that's how you're going to feel. And it's very powerful. Very powerful. I recommend doing that game in one sitting. I messed that up because I didn't know how long it was going to be, and so I was like, I'll just take a break here, and I literally just took a break right before the very end. And it really diminished the climax. But it was still great. Another example I think of off the top of my head, because I have like two I think I go to, is the original. Is it the right way? The Tomb Raider, I think it's 2013. The Tomb Raider reboot, the first one. I thought the first one was really, really good. Ultimately, I wish the story had more arc towards, it kind of stayed. But at the first one, the first one was really good, and you got to see the whole game. Like I listened to interviews and this thing. The whole game was about showing the progress of Lara as she went from scared to capable. And so all it was really good game direction. All the systems were doing that. Like you were slowly getting your gear and upgrading your gear to be like scared and basic and just there for survival, to capable and comfortable, to full on offense, conqueror of this scenario. So you had the story doing that, you had your gear progression doing that, you had like the level progression doing that, where in the first levels you're just barely trying to survive, in the last levels you're taking it to the people who screwed you over and you are saving the day and blowing up some dudes. And Laura's like screaming stuff like, nah, you son of a bitch. It's like, we have come far. And it's great. It's fantastic. It's a wonderful ride. But one of the things I really remember from that game that I think will always stick with me because it's such a marriage of gameplay and story is well, if you haven't played the reboot, it's it has a loving nickname of Laura Torture Simulator or Laura Death Simulator because whenever there's these platforming sections and if you mess them up, it always goes to a kill cam of Laura dying in some horrible way. So there's a lot of like body horror with Laura that gives you the stakes for the game. And there's one part of the story where she falls down and lands on like a rebar spike. Right? And so she is fallen down. She's got this big rebar spike like through her abdomen, and she has to pull it out, right? Because she's got to continue, right? That's what makes the story so good. Is you see just her perseverance and how tough she is. And so what they do for the story is they make it a quick time event, a QTE, where I guess not really, it's not timed, but where to pull the rebar out. In the cutscene, you have to smash like X or something. And as you smash X, Laura grabs the rebar and pulls on it. And of course, this hurts her. So she's like, ugh, and she's wincing in pain the more she pulls on it. But what is there to do? You have to pull it out. So what do? You press X more. And she pulls harder, and she winces harder, and she's in more pain. But you have to keep going. You have to keep pressing it. The rebar's got to come out, man. And you are like hurting this girl, right? Because, you're playing as her. She's hurting herself to do this, but she has to do it. And she has to will herself to pull the rebar out so she can continue. And you have to will yourself to keep doing it because you don't feel it physically, but you feel it everywhere else because you got the visuals, you got the sound, and you're just like, I was wincing in pain with nothing left to do but just hit the button faster to hope it got over faster. And that is such a marriage of what is happening in the story and what I'm doing in the gameplay so that I feel the moment, even though I'm just pressing one button. Like, I think that'll stick with me for like ever. It was fantastic. So when you do get that marriage, those are my go-tos. So when you do get that marriage of story and gameplay, you get, the peak of the medium. You get things that only video games can do, and the best there is, like the height of the medium, what the pinnacle of gaming, if you will. And so it's definitely valuable to go for it, and you definitely want it, right? And man, it's great when you get it, but it's hard. It's not required. You can make a great game without even going there. And, and so you just don't see it that often. And today I was reminded of what happens when you go too far the wrong way and you have literally a history lecture standing in between you and really cool action gameplay, action combat, and I'm just sitting there like, deliver me. What is this? So that's the video. That's what I wanted to talk about. That's what I wanted to just get off my chest. Like I said, I don't really have like a super big point or anything. It's just interesting. It's just something that I think about a lot. When it goes really well, like a couple of examples I just gave, and when it goes really poorly, like it did today. So I don't know. Maybe treat it as a conversation. Let me know. What's your favorite moments? What's your unfavorite moments? How do you feel about it? How do you reckon it? What do you think goes well? What's the way to do it? Is it, or does it even matter? Maybe am I making too much of a big deal? I don't know. Let me know. But that's the video today. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I hope you have a good whatever you're trying to do. And I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.